simple. It's very simple. It has to be simple. We complicate it. We add salt and pepper and spices to it when it doesn't need it. It's a complete system. But there isn't time to talk about it tonight. The reason I'm stressing on two things, the Quran, Kitabullah, the book of God, which is complete, no crookedness. Why? Because if anybody challenges you thereafter, because after all, let's face it, we are victims of a system which is unavoidable. For example, if I want to study my forefathers, and I do need to in order to understand my present situation, and I need to project my future on the basis of my past, I have to go back to the sources of history to understand why I am where I am. But there is an inherent flaw in the system of our existence. And the inherent flaw, for example, such as one, is the fact that people who win are the ones who write history. So whenever there's a war, the army that won is the one that's going to be the most prevalent historian in the time. Today you find when Germany lost in World War II, who's writing all the history? The winners are. You find any battle, historically, go back in history and see who made up most of the history. Even Alexander the Great, when he used to go and fight on battles, he used to take historians with him. He says, you write. Everything I do, you write. Why? Because it imparts a power where it begins to live forever and you become the controller of the future. So therefore we know that what we have received in our hands, these hadiths, historical references, events, are not necessarily 100%. If anybody says it's 100%, they're not speaking sensibly. Always, every historical reference has to be questioned with some integrity. But Allah has built a built-in system. Just like if I want to unravel the history, I can untangle it like a judge in the court of law by asking the right questions and looking at the dimensions, and I can tell who's speaking the truth and who's not. But it's a very difficult task to do. Unless you're an expert in it, it's very difficult. So Allah has fixed a book for me that no one has touched, and no one can fudge it. No one can add their 2 cents worth, and no one can subtract something they don't like. Allah says it's a complete book. You just live with it. That anytime you hear a story that the Holy Prophet says such and such, and Ahlul Bayt says such and such, or Fulan bin Fulan says such and such, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has left us with a rule, and our messenger has mentioned it, and it's acceptable in all schools of thought, that anytime you hear hadith, place it in front of the Quran. If the Quran accepts it or is silent about it, accept it. But if the Quran rejects it in any form or manner, reject it categorically. Don't even look at who has said it. Because the Quran is my template. Subhanallah, look at this book. It's a book which was compiled, formulated, written down with the scribes like Imam Ali ﷺ in the lifetime of the Prophet, and compiled and formulated in his lifetime. There are people who say it was formulated, meaning it was compiled after the Prophet's departure. One more fingerprint of the evil forces. Why? To remove the validity of this book in order to confuse me. But Allah says, no, impossible. The messenger, the Rahmatul lil Alameen, the perfect being, the one who didn't make a single mistake, will leave this Quran, which is the most heavy thing, Thaqalain, to you and I to formulate it? It's absurd. It's absolutely ludicrous, as we say. Impossible. Don't even think for anyone to say that the Quran was compiled after the messenger. It is tantamount to stabbing the Holy Prophet. I hate to say this the way I said it, but this is the reality. Because at the end of the day, the reason I say it this way, it is like I see that vision of somebody drilling a hole in the middle of the ocean in the ship that you and I are still sitting on, and he's saying, it's okay, let's drill it. I said, don't you even get near the drill. That's what's happening. Such talk is tantamount to drilling holes. And Allah says, don't you dare do this. ومن الناس من يشتري لهو الحديث ليضل عن سبيل الله بغير علم ويتخذها هزوا أولئك لهم عذاب مهين. Those who make frivolous talk to take Allah, people from the way of Allah, without knowledge, Allah says for them is a grave punishment. Why shouldn't they be punished? Shouldn't the one who causes damage and havoc and destruction and murder and confusion be punished? Ask any civil society. Is it not fair? Then Allah is saying, tell them, those who create trouble in society, there's a punishment. People say, why is God punishing? What should God do? You and I do it, and we're just His creation. Why don't you and I stop? How amazing humans are. And we complain to Allah the very thing we do. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying this Quran is complete. It's got its own science. When I spoke at one university and I was just exposing the science, I could see those scholars looking at me like, wow, we never knew you have such a system. Because if you ever challenge it, the Quran never lets you go outside of it. It comes back right to it between the two kinds of verses, the muhkamat and the mutashabihat. I won't talk about it tonight, but just to establish the basic foundation that the Quran is a complete book. It is so complete that if you and I lay our lives on it, it will not misguide us. So Kitabullah. So this is what? This is Quran which is written. Samit. The silent. Then there's Quran, Natiq, the moving, the talking, the example. Now examine this. I'm presenting to you tonight. You will find that the best presentation in any subject is when there are examples given. If I give an analogy or an example, let me give you an example. You say, excellent. Makes the point clear. You're no longer just talking philosophy. You're bringing it down to earth. Give me an example. Don't you agree? We can't function without examples. Cannot. Even books, manuals, show me examples on how to use the program or how to use the object. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is completing that this is a written system. Now you need an example. What is your example? Allah said, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Indeed, in the messenger, for you is the best example. See, the Quran is clear. So anytime you have any discussions, say, I want proof from the Quran. Show me evidence from the Quran. You will notice succession after the Prophet is in the Quran. Love of Ahlul Bayt is in the Quran. Who are these people? It's in the Quran. The system of why we need to follow is in the Quran. There is not a single example that Allah has left out. وَلَقَدْ ضَرَبْنَا لِلنَّاسِ فِي هَذَا الْقُرْآنِ مِنْ كُلِّ مَثَلٍ. Indeed, we have struck an example in this book for mankind, every example. مِنْ كُلِّ مَثَلٍ. So it's upon us to execute. It's upon us to look. And therefore you find it's very logical that here's a messenger who comes and who establishes a system, who brings a template, a business plan for you and I to follow. But without example, it's not possible. Without leadership, it's impossible. Even in a corporation, you need a president. You need a leader. You need a leader. But in matters of business, the president can take advice from others. But in matters of faith, it is not the same. In matters of faith, the leader takes advice, but not from a subordinate, but from a superior. Simple. You find Khidr, as they say, Khidr was the one, some say maybe not, but it is Khidr probably, who met Musa alayhi salam on the banks. And as Khidr was doing things, Khidr is saying to Musa alayhi salam, you won't be able to bear this. You won't be able to bear. Why? Because you don't have the ta'wil. You don't have the inner meaning behind it. And it's expected of you not to be able to bear it because you haven't been exposed by it. And when Musa alayhi salam reacted, the way he reacted, it was a perfect reaction, not a mistake. That when Khidr says to لَن تَسْتَطِيعَ مَيَّ صَبْرًا, it wasn't a mistake. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing that Musa alayhi salam should have reacted this way. When he sees a young child being killed, he shouldn't just be standing there. He should say, what have you done? Because my fitra is talking. My inner soul, my nafs is challenging. How can you kill a child? But Khidr says to him, you don't know the ta'wil, so it's okay. But then I will reveal it to you. So if I hear the Prophet learning from another. But the Prophet never learns from his followers. Never. So these ideas that prophets came and they were giving examples to people and they were making